Alrighty, tidy folkerinos. Today I am back in the shop with the forklift. This was a whole other day. The forklift took 2 or 3 weeks to complete, waiting on parts or having to kind of make some things up as we went along because parts were no longer available or whatever the case may be. Today we're going to be rebuilding the brake pedal assembly because when I pulled it off I noticed it was a bit crusty just because age and what have you. B, the grease zerk, whenever you tried to grease it, would spit grease kind of out of the threads a little bit, which tells me it was the wrong grease zerk. Somebody probably changed it at some point, and knowing people, they probably put the wrong thread pitch in there. I've got, you can see there, a little metric kit on the side. I'll show you guys the grease zerk here in a minute. For now, let's start with the disassembly. It took me longer than I would like to admit to realize where the roll pin was in the shaft to get the shaft out of the assembly. You can see me there looking around, tapping on it a few times to see where things were pivoting, see how it was moving, and exactly kind of what it wanted to do. So then I found the roll pin and I took the roll pin out, and then it was easy. It all came apart. It was weird. Looking at it from the bottom, you couldn't really see the roll pin. Looking at it from the top, it was about flush with the brake pedal bracket. I thought at first it was a broken grease zerk. I figured each pedal would have a grease zerk, and then the shaft would just be kind of interference fit pressed into place. That's not the case. It was one of them set on a roll pin and the other one sits on bushings, which makes sense now thinking about it, because one of them presses the brakes only and the other pedal presses the brakes and it's not a clutch, it's a hydraulic bypass inside the transmission, the pump assembly. So one of them is, I don't remember what they call it, but one of them is the brake and the other one is like a soft brake. It's a clutch essentially. It's not really a clutch, it's hydraulic. You'll see the adjustment here in a minute, it'll make a little bit more sense. But for now, we're just taking the thing apart, getting it all scrubbed up. Also, disclaimer again, each of these that I do this, I'll probably say it. Don't stick your hands in the chemicals, kiddos. It's really not all that good for you. 3 times now while I've been down here already, I've stuck my hands in this bucket, and if you're smart about it, you can do it, but you gotta make sure you don't do it for very long, and you gotta wash it off, and you gotta flush your hands really, really well with soap and or water and blah blah blah. And it's better just to not stick your hands in the solution. Use implements, use tools, use some big heavy chemical gloves. Don't do what I do. Don't be like me. Because all the skin came off my hands. Not all the skin, but a lot of the skin came off my hands after sticking my hands in these dang chemicals. Regardless, every time I take something apart, if it's greasy, crusty, dirty, chunky, kind of grody looking, obviously I'm not going to leave it like that. Some people do, but if you can see the face I'm making right now, it's a eyes half closed, brow furrowed, shaking my head, mouth kind of half open in disbelief, I guess. If you're taking it off and you've got it in your hands anyway, just clean the darn thing out, or off, or up, or whichever Adverb? I don't know. Whichever thing you prefer to say. Clean it. Especially if it's something that gets grease and or lube on and or around it at some point. I digress. Back to talking about the video, probably, perhaps, maybe a little bit. So I took the pedals out and I cleaned them off. You saw I took the pads off so I wouldn't ruin them in the chemicals, because again, the chemicals are kind of nasty and not really good for most anything other than cleaning off literally just metal. Right here we see taking the grease zerk out, and you can see it takes like that. That's how far the grease zerk was installed. Not very far at all, obviously. Which is no bueno. Obviously. So we took that grease zerk out and we put a new metric grease zerk. I'm assuming, I didn't check it, of course, because I'm, well, lazy. But I'm assuming, considering the fact that it was a Nissan, it's probably a metric part that was installed in the thing in the first place. And I could never get the camera to focus. After a second I gave up and I just shook the grease zerk at the camera there. And that grease zerk, while it doesn't look like it's installed fully and flush, I assure you it's as flush as it's going to get, because if I put it any further it goes in and interferes with the shaft. So I put it in all the way and I saw it sticking out on the inside, tried to slide the shaft in, and I had to pull it out like, I don't know, it's like 3/4 of a thread that I had to pull it out. Not a whole lot, but enough that it looks like it's kind of sticking out. It's still snug, it's not going anywhere. You still have to use a crescent to pull it out, and the grease does not come out around the threads when you try to pump grease into it. That's the way it should work. You can see there that the old nylon bushings, they were still intact, quote unquote. They showed evidence of wear and age and insert adjective here, because they're probably from the 1980s. So I went to Ace, and strangely enough, funnily enough, crazily enough, they had these brass bushings that had 98% the same dimensions, honestly. The flange was a little bit thicker than the nylon bushings were, so I was only able to put one bushing on the inside of the bracket. I had to get a bit creative with the other one. I'll tell you about that in a second. What I ended up doing, though, was, so the ID of the brass bushings was about 0.5 millimeter smaller than the nylon. Of course, being brass, it doesn't stretch, obviously. And the OD of the brass was about 1/4 millimeter smaller. The nylon bushings just sat in the bracket, so did the brass ones. Cool. The brass bushings would not slide over the shaft at all because of that 0.5 millimeter. You would have had to press them, and you, being brass, you probably would have damaged the bushings. So what I ended up doing was I took a piece of sandpaper, wrapped it around a drill bit, put that on the drill press, and wallered out the ID of the brass bushing very, very slowly with, I think it was 400 grit, until it just fit over the shaft. You can see there it's kind of a little bit snug trying to put the little shaft in there. And pedal assembly after reassembly was nice and tight and good and happy, and it felt great. There was no slop in it. So there were 4 bushings. One of the nylon ones fell apart as soon as I took the thing apart, which is why it was kind of sloppy. So you got the bushings in there, got the shaft in there, got the roll pin back in, and job's good. And what I did have to do was put just a standard worm hose clamp between that flat piece of the shaft where it attaches to the hydraulic clutch arm and the bushing, just as a keeper. I could have ground a couple of grooves in the shaft for an E-clip or a C-clip or some other such method, but a hose clamp fit perfectly in the area. It does not interfere, nor will it ever interfere with the mechanical operation of the machinery. So it is a sufficient solution that does not have to be engineered. It can be, you know, backyard rednecked kind of into place. And it did. And it worked. And it's great. And it's happy. And it's still going. So it's fine. Shut up, leave me alone. Anyway, we see here reinstalling the pedal assembly into the body of a lay forklift. Two of the bolts they're not hard to get to, but I don't have any magnets and they're kind of weird to put in the holes there. But it took me a second, got them in. I just kind of lined it up, dropped it, and if it fell sideways, picked it back up and dropped it again until it went in the hole, and I could just put the ratchet on it and spin it in. Easy peasy. The transmission fluid dipstick goes right in the middle of this bracket, which I thought was weird. So I had to be very careful not to get dirt and dust and debris into the transmission, because that could have been very, very bad. This is kind of the culmination of quote-unquote the brake system, because I had to do, you saw in the last video, I had to replace all the springs and lube the bearings and adjust them and replace a brake cable and blah 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 blah. Primarily the concern was the wheel cylinders, because the bleeders were damaged and you couldn't bleed them anymore, so I had to replace the wheel cylinders, which necessitated disassembling the whole thing in the first place. Right here you can see, so somebody had the brake adjuster cranked all the way to one side for some reason. I assume that's because the thing stopped working a long time ago, and they just kept cranking it further and further and further and further until they were just they were always applying pressure at the brake master for whatever reason, and eventually they just ran out of shoe contact because the right side adjuster was the wrong adjuster, as I said in the last video. We put all the right parts in it. I made sure everything spun the right way this time. So we were undoing probably a 30-year-old mistake that somebody had made. And here you can see me installing and adjusting the full brake lever stop bolt that was missing for whatever reason. I don't know if it didn't get locked down correctly at some point and just vibrated loose, or somebody took it out and lost it, or I have no idea what. But it was missing, so I reinstalled it and adjusted it correctly. One thing about this setup is there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different adjustments. You have the pedal stop adjustment, which takes up free play in the stop and where the pedals sit at rest. You have the pedal to pedal adjustment, which adjusts where the two pedals sit in relation to each other so that you can have your trans brake working when you press the brake pedal. And then you have the trans brake adjustment, which adjusts the point at which the hydraulic is disconnected to drive the drive wheels, the differential. You have the drum adjustments, which is just your standard brake drum adjustments to keep the shoes close enough to contact with the drums that you hit the brakes and they work. And then you have the parking brake adjustment, which obviously adjusts the parking brake so that the thing doesn't roll when it's off and you apply the parking brake. This right here is the absolute last part of the brakes, bleeding the hydraulic system, for the drums, the whole reason we replaced the wheel cylinders in the first place, so that we could do this job. And I am very happy to say that the customer is exceedingly ecstatic about the fact that his forklift works again, and that everything is functional and new and fresh and good. That will be it for this video. Stay tuned for the next installment, which is some other maintenance stuff. As always, don't forget to like it, subscribe it, crank it, and rip it, and we'll see you in the next one.